Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the EPP webinar. My name is Marta. I am a member of the events marketing team at EPP, and today it's a great pleasure to have Chris from Vendavo with us to deliver the presentation, and Mitch will join us for the Q&A session. Before I hand over to Chris, I would like to explain to you how this webinar works. As I said, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You can submit your questions anytime by clicking the Q&A button on the control panel. If you prefer to make a live question, you can click the raise hand button. We will unmute you and you can speak directly. This webinar will be recorded and will be available afterwards on demand with Vendavo's team or on EPP Prime for EPP Prime members. Thank you for your attention, and now I would like to hand over to Chris.
Thank you, Marta. A pleasure as always. So welcome to today's webinar in partnership with EPP. My name is Chris Kennedy-Sloane, and I'm a business consultant with Vendavo. I've been working in pricing and pricing adjacent fields for 16 years now, covering IT, high tech, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, life sciences, and genomics as well. Thank you for joining. I'd like to cover three topics today, roughly evenly. Firstly, a look back at 2023. Of course, this is the basis for everything moving forwards. So it makes sense to frame the conversation around what's come before. Secondly, I'd like to talk about 2024 and potentially beyond, and the trends that we at Vendavo see as being key in that pricing space moving forwards. And thirdly and finally, I want to focus down on AI. An overview of neural nets, generative AI, and large language models, and what they could mean generally economically, but also specifically in the pricing space. And yes, I'm going to make you wait until the very end before we talk about the AI piece. So let's get started. So starting with a general overview of the economic situation in 2023. From speaking to my colleagues, as well as a variety of stakeholders across many industries, it's become clear that 2023 has been a year of a supply-demand curve inversion. We saw a number of major economies either fall into recession in 2023 or flirt with it. Germany and Europe was particularly significant, Sweden and Finland also seeing negative GDP growth. Equally, France and the UK were growing at or below 1%. So a number of quarters showed flat or negative growth in those economies. Even the USA looks set to have grown relatively slowly at about 2.5%. Naturally, this is a sign that the strong rebound we saw in 21, 22 from post-COVID times, with some of those economies recovering to the tune of 6, 7 or 8% year on year, has flattened. And there are further signs out there that significant increase in consumer saving that happened, with rates exploding for an average of 10 to 12% in 2019 to 20 to 30% in 2020, is now either spent out, or at least the willingness to spend here has severely decreased. Of course, this high saving spend out was both a contributing factor to the inflationary environment we've seen, as well as now being a contributory factor to the demand fall as consumers cut back spending. And this naturally has a knock-on effect on all industries, right? Even those focused on B2B, as that end customer spending drops. What does this actually mean? Well, it means that a number of people we've spoken to are now seeing a change from a value-focused strategy with pricing driving revenue to a volume-focused strategy where capacity, and particularly overcapacity, is being discounted to ensure supply is sold. Particularly in non-elastic supply industries like semiconductors, where it's very arduous and expensive process to stop and start manufacturing lines, this is going to have significant downward pricing pressure. This volume-focused environment has a knock-on effect on pricing departments too. So what I'd like to do is take a look at some results from a recent survey we completed with an industry partner to put that into context. So we have completed this survey over the past 5 years, with a view being to understand how the industry is interacting with pricing organizations over a period of time. Here we're looking at who owns pricing in the respondents' organizations, 2020 in green, 2021 in dark blue, 2022 in light blue, and the most recent results there for 2023 in yellow. And I really see three key takeaways here. The first is the decline of the concept of the chief pricing officer. In 2021, the inflationary environment came into focus, And we saw a huge increase comparatively in the perceived importance of pricing and of this role. As this falls away in 2023, some of that pricing authority has also ebbed away. And to some degree, this appears to have moved to sales. Maybe that's unsurprising given the shift to a volume-orientated pricing strategy in a lot of industries. But there's also a real pickup here in the marketing organization owning pricing in a number of businesses. So that decline in either business line or chief pricing officers has mostly been equally split between the sales and marketing orgs in terms of picking up that responsibility. Now, I would imagine that given these results, there are probably some people on this call that have either seen their pricing authority eroded over the last year, and that can be a bitter pill to swallow, right? To some degree, I'm reminded of the trend to cut IT department staffing and costs because everything in IT is currently working well. And what we may be seeing here is a similar trend in pricing. Give sales and marketing authority to cut price because we need volume without considering the longer term pricing strategy. Managing expectations around this internally in your organizations is going to be key in 2024. Measuring value, justifying the contribution of that pricing organization, that's going to be imperative, particularly given the conflict of interest with sales orgs when you're talking about setting pricing. Otherwise, there's a real risk that pricing departments may shrink. And speaking of that, here I have two more results from that recent survey. So this is specifically for 2023, looking either at how many pricing professionals work in a business at the top here, or looking at whether the business is responding, we're planning on recruiting more pricing professionals at the bottom there. Now, really, for me, the standout here is that essentially it looks like most pricing organizations will be roughly flat in 2024. There's not really a major expansion expected. Most organizations have reasonably small teams. Majority have between 1 and 5 pricers. And I would argue that, in spite of these small, relatively static teams, we're seeing more and more requirements to change pricing more rapidly, continuing into 2024. As we know, pricing changed very rapidly on the way up in the inflationary environment. Some businesses moving from changing pricing, once per year to 2, 3, 4 or more times. On discussions with businesses, we've discovered the same is potentially expected on the way down. That challenging economic environment is engendering the need to rapidly respond to changing market conditions on the way down too. So those static teams that were maybe hoping perhaps we'd have a time of relative calm, unfortunately, that seems to not be the case. So finding ways to efficiently and effectively react to our market and business needs around pricing, that's going to be really key. This isn't an emergency footing situation, at least for now. This frequency of change, this is the new normal. Now, some organizations, they are looking to recruit to offset these challenges. What are they looking for? So for those organizations that are looking to recruit, and even those that aren't in terms of what they value, what we have here on the left here is the ranking of key pricing skills for 2023. Of course, the main takeaway here is that leveraging data, the power of insights continues to be key to recruiting successful prices. And it will also be important to measuring value, communicating that value within your business. In the end, measurement is going to be the imperative piece, as we discussed earlier. Price management and value continue to be a strong second and third, although I would be interested to see whether that value definition changes into 2024, given the supply-demand environment. For me, the strangest part of this response is, actually that change management seems to be severely undervalued in a business segment that seeks to reinvent itself and that is at risk of being deprioritized by other elements of organizations. There is a piece here of a self-fulfilling prophecy, with prices naturally gravitating to what they're best at, and consequently taking charge of those areas. One thing we have seen time and time again is that successful pricing projects and ongoing processes also have robust change management processes to support that rollout and adoption. So even if these areas are not maybe key to recruitment or to getting recruited, I would certainly advocate for understanding and appreciating change management principles to ensure, the success of that role and also for the pricing department in business. So that is a very, very quick retrospective for 2023. If you would like to see more of that survey, there is a lot more available on our website, as well as commentary from myself and my colleagues. I've really only very much scratched the surface here, so please take a look. I think that's enough of looking backwards, so let's take a little bit of a look forwards. So as you might imagine, naturally I was kind of hoping to kick off the predictions for 2024 with something really positive, and I think to some degree there is that. The IMF, International Monetary Foundation, outlook for real GDP growth in 2024 actually doesn't show any major economies are seeing the potential for decline. But it also doesn't show any particularly strong growth for Europe or the Americas. India is forecast to be a significant growth driver for the worldwide economy, with China a close second. However, there is a note of caution around those Chinese growth figures. What we have seen in recent years is in some advanced economies, particularly China and Japan, real challenges around replacement rates in terms of births, which have been giving us issues for years that are finally coming home to roost. So China reported 7.8 million births in 2023, with 11 million deaths alongside, meaning the population of China actually fell by 3.5 million. Now, that might not seem like a lot in a country of 1.4 billion people, but it's becoming clear that demographically, there will be significant challenges for the Chinese economic growth over the coming years. This trend isn't limited to China, but it will probably see the largest impact. And for industries which have invested heavily in trying to penetrate with what is ostensibly a great opportunity of a marketplace, this may see the beginning of significant turmoil. It will take a while to bite. It's definitely something to watch, though, through 2024 and in coming years. Alongside the reduction in potential consumers and naturally, therefore, spending and knock-on business-to-business driven sales, the lifespan of our devices continues to increase. So replacement rates for smartphones have grown significantly over the last few years. We saw them rise from 2.6 years to 3 years in only the last 4 years. So that length of life is getting longer and longer. The same is true for computers or even cars. The average age of a European car rose from 11.1 years in 2017 to 12 years in 2021. Now, I appreciate that might not seem like a lot, but these trends are further supported by government initiatives and policies, and those are expected to expand further in 2024. For example, France will now pay up to €200 to support the repair of laptops, phones, even clothes, to support the repair and renewal of consumer consumables and devices. This trend may be extremely positive in some cases, so spare parts manufacturers, aftermarket OEMs, they all stand to benefit. But there also may be serious issues here for new device manufacturers. And finally, in spite of the capacity increases and supply-demand inversions in some industries, in others, we continue to see supply chain issues. So when it comes to electronics, fabs that manufacture those take a long time to spin up, about 3 to 5 years in most cases. So despite companies like TSMC and others investing billions in manufacturing directly in Germany, Audi, for example, as a car company, are still predicting shortages for the coming 2 to 3 years. Furthermore, with the advent of AI, of course, a new challenger has appeared to impact the uptake of GPU silicon. With Bitcoin and other blockchain already putting a squeeze on this area, 2024 is going to see real bottlenecks for the kind of computing power required to run genuine large language model calculations. Is it all doom and gloom for 2024? Of course, economic forecasts can definitely be inaccurate, particularly when you take them at face value. We already know there are some sectors where continued supply shortages will support pricing power and potential growth if they can build those cars quickly enough. But with an average error of about 1.1% for long-term economic forecasting, some forecasters can be surprisingly accurate. But in a market where growth is expected to be about 1%, that 1.1% swing can be the difference between a bumper year or a recession. As pricers, it will be our job to prepare for both of these scenarios, bearing in mind that the swings and also the accuracy of those forecasts will be severely reduced the more discrete they become. Alongside this, the technological expectations of our customers and our colleagues are beginning to shift really rapidly. We're seeing millennials taking up management positions, becoming our counterparts in our negotiation environments. 2024 is the year where digital negotiation will become more and more important. There may even be a potential for some automated negotiation to begin to creep in, although how well this works in practice remains to be seen, particularly in any market where there isn't a big power imbalance. Of course, I can't predict where the next big oversupply or undersupply dynamic will take place, but what I can predict is that there will be some, particularly likely to be with a more significant impact than in previous times. And one element of this, which may affect all of us professionally and also personally, is the possibility that 2024 may in fact be the year of peak oil. And I don't mean production, but in terms of demand, or at least 2024 may bring us much closer to this. You know, from plastics manufacturing, petroleum itself, shipping costs, consumer heating, even electric costs, the impacts that a significant shock here might have economically could be very, very large. So I accept this as a big if, but if we do begin to see oversupply here starting to bite on oil and gas, the potential impacts on inflation, general prices, and operating costs could be really massive. Just as they were, of course, in the opposite way, in the gas crises triggered by the Ukraine war in 2022 and 2023. Finally, 2024 may see the continued introduction of further disruptors, right? So Waymo, for example, the self-driving car company, has now driven 7.1 million miles in the US as of December 2023. Collectively, self-driving cars have driven 44 million miles in the USA alone. Those self-driving cars appear to be 2 to 8 times more safe than a human driver, depending on the statistics you use and how you use them. There are major expansions of this technology planned in almost every jurisdiction in the world: the USA, France, Germany, and the UK. This, alongside the day rental car model, seeing continued rapid expansion, could see real impacts for automotive manufacturers as well as aftermarket parts suppliers. Businesses can go one of two ways. You can repair or maintain with the cheapest parts possible, or you can spend more to get better value per mile and reliability. So there's a potential that as these markets expand, if managed correctly, value-based part manufacture and pricing could create a virtuous cycle of per part pricing reliability. In the end, all of this can be seen as an opportunity if correctly managed and understood. So, what would we recommend to prepare for these movements? The continued need for increased reaction times, both to economic and disruptor shifts, means that simplification or rationalization of pricing processes is key. Where these can't be simplified or rationalized, solutions to ensure they can be maintained and changed at higher speeds are going to be imperative. The idea here is to avoid broad brush approaches to price reactions. And to be clear, by that I mean, if you can't help a business make changes rationally, they will make them irrationally. Take 5% off all prices, for example. This is a key part of the power of the pricing function, helping value inform pricing decisions, even in the face of economic uncertainty. In order to be able to advocate for that power, the impact from a margin and revenue standpoint needs to be measured and communicated internally. Find the language that helps get that message across in your business, bearing in mind it will be different for every stakeholder. And finally, necessity, I think, is going to be key. This is a period of supply-demand inversion. Every industry will have necessities, and these will be resilient in 2024. Whether that's tires, medical supplies, DIY products, whatever it may be for your industry, some segments will be more resilient as they just can't be cut back on. They're not elastic. Understanding what these are and making sure that you're well positioned to manage and capitalize on those market dynamics will make a huge difference. Of course, throughout all of this that I've said now, we've barely mentioned one thing. We haven't talked in any detail about AI. This is a big subject for almost every business. It's already impacting things like software development and graphic design to a major degree. Probably, I would imagine everyone on this call has experimented with ChatGPT, the large language model du jour, and it's something I'll admit is pretty impressive. But what actually is AI? How does it work? And can it help us as pricers? I'm going to try and answer a few of those questions, both from my perspective and from the perspective of Vendavo. Now, a disclaimer, I'm not an AI expert. I studied computer science. I have spent a lot of time reading around generative AI and large language models, but there are many smarter AI technologists out there. But I am a pricer and I know enough to talk in generalities. So let's get into it. Before we actually talk AI, it's important to clarify what we actually mean when we're talking about it. So there are generally accepted to be 4 classifications or levels of AI in proceeding complexity and consequently ability from left to right, as is displayed here. So reactive machines are the simplest. They have no memory, so the same input always delivers the same output. They don't learn, but they can produce sophisticated reactions nonetheless. This is on the basis of the complexity of their programming and, of course, their input-output scheme. So a good example of a reactive machine is Deep Blue, IBM's chess robot. You may remember it beating Garry Kasparov in the late 1990s. Limited memory AI is the next stage. So this type of AI can look into the past. It can monitor specific situations or objects over time. Notably, the limited memory part of this here is key. So this AI can learn from its data set on a temporary basis, but in practice, the schema and the way it reacts still tends to be fixed. It won't evolve over time and become more complex or change. So a neural net here is a good example of a limited memory AI. They can sometimes seem to learn, but in practice, they're merely reacting to increases in their historical data, which affects the calculations. Theory of mind AI has the potential to understand the world. So it can understand, that other entities have thoughts and emotions. It can understand why things are important through deduction without being specifically informed of them. A good example of this in science fiction would be HAL 9000. I'll accept a slightly malignant example, but nonetheless. And then finally, self-aware AI. So this is a machine that understands that it is a machine. It would understand itself, how it works, and be able to adjust itself accordingly and to the world around it. It would have thoughts and desires of its own. An example of something like this here would be Andrew, the self-same bicentennial man from the titular book by Isaac Asimov. So before we go any further, it's important to maybe make a little bit of a point here. I like this quote very much. This is from famous author Arthur C. Clarke. It could initially seem trite, but what it is actually saying is that humans are very bad at misrepresenting things that we misunderstand. Large language models like ChatGPT are incredibly exciting. This form of generative AI is undoubtedly a huge advance in our understanding and application of artificial intelligence. And let's be honest, things are always more exciting if they seem mysterious and magical. How does it work? Well, you can't really get into the nuts and bolts of that because it's a neural network. So it has billions of nodes, but it does seem to work, doesn't it, right? So where are we right now with that kind of AI? So you'll notice I've put this line very close to the left here, by limited memory. Large language models like ChatGPT-4 are still limited memory devices. They can't actually learn or change. So you'll notice this from how if you teach ChatGPT-4 something in a session, it will forget and has to be reprompted in the next session. That's because it's a limited memory AI, albeit a very advanced one. And because it is largely inscrutable, what it is doing seems really exciting and mysterious. When you drill into it a little bit more and understand exactly how it works, well, I think you can strip some of that mystery away. And in doing so, I think you can understand a little bit more about how it can and cannot be useful. So I'd like to start by talking about something called tokenization. So large language models like ChatGPT-4 use a concept called tokenization. They don't digest language as words, or rather, they don't always digest language as words. Hundreds of billions of lines of text are separated into tokens that can be a whole word, they could be a part of a word, a symbol or a number, etc. And the neural network is made up of equally billions of individual nodes which process these tokens. They use a training data set to create a probability data set, which is a model of human language. Now, one of the most important and exciting things that ChatGPT has taught us is something that maybe can be a little bit surprising to understand. So actually, human language, how we put words together, how they're arranged, is not actually as complicated as we'd like to think it is. Natural rules emerge about what word, or in the case of large language models, what token should follow after that previous token. Distilled to its most base form, what ChatGPT does is it takes a prompt and it says, well, what token would be the most likely to follow after this set of tokens? And this is the language probability space that the neural network creates. It takes that token and it says, and then what token would be most likely to follow after that token, and after that, and after that, and after that. And in doing so, this formulates a very human-looking response. It might help to maybe think about this somewhat like predictive text on your phone. So you've probably seen the idea of starting with a particular sentence and seeing what autocomplete on your phone gives as a result. Large language models are doing exactly that, but just much, much better. And furthermore, they don't actually take the most probable word. Number one, that would result in the same response to every prompt, which isn't very human. If someone asked you the same question twice in a casual setting, you'd be very unlikely to respond exactly the same way twice. Actually, through trial and error, the programmers of ChatGPT have found that a fudge factor of about 0.8 resulted in the most human-sounding responses. This is called the temperature of the response in AI terms, by the way. But so let me recall you to my previous point. Human language is not as complicated as we'd like to think it is. So some things can be made more simple to calculate. There is a concept called computational reducibility. A slightly wrong example of this is zipping files, making the data smaller. You can also make some sums smaller. It turns out that in the case of neural networks, things like generating images or finding a response to a sentence or set of sentences that mostly make sense is computationally reducible. So we can reduce these to a suitably small set of calculations that they can be managed by a neural net with only billions of connections and nodes. So in contrast, the human brain, we have about 86 billion neurons and about 100 trillion connections, just to give you an idea of the order of magnitude of the differentials here. Luckily, we only need a tiny bit of that to actually do language processing and to form words, which is why you can carry on a conversation while thinking about something else or doing something complex with your hands or even driving a car, because language processing is simpler than we'd like to think it is. Notably, quite a lot of things are not computationally reducible. They're computationally irreducible. You need to follow all of the calculation steps through. So things like generating hashes for cryptology or creating a fractal image, these require that each of the previous steps of the calculation are followed. To some degree, this is why it's hard to do mathematics in your brain, but it's quite easy to just speak. To be clear, this is why computers are normally good at maths, but bad at language, and why humans are bad at maths, but good at language. This is another gross oversimplification, but hopefully you get the point. And why does this actually matter? Why does this matter for prices? So large language models are just choosing what token makes sense to follow the previous, and they have a predisposition as a result to what we call hallucinations. Hallucinations are things that the large language model presents as truth, which are not true. They lie, although they don't have the capacity to consciously do so. Notably, this also means they lack the capacity to consciously not lie. They don't understand what's important in a sentence or set of sentences. So take this example here. This is a bibliography generated by GPT for a particular abstract of a paper. A number of these people exist. In probability space, these tokens make quite good sense that they would follow the tokens of the abstract. The text after the citations also, in some cases, exists. It makes sense that those tokens might be relevant. But ChatGPT doesn't understand that in some cases, it's very important that some particular things are correct. So C.A. Balanis up there, he is a scientist. He did write a paper on antenna theory. X-Chen and Y. Zong are scientists. They did write a paper on microstrip antennas, but not in that year. They also shared that paper with a third author who's been missed off here, Jay Pilkinson, and it was published in 2021, not 2013. So the paper as quoted doesn't exist because ChatGPT knows that's what a citation should look like, but not that it's important that it's correct. This is a hallucination. It's something that seems to a model which understands the structure of human language to make complete sense. And to a casual observer, it looks accurate. It makes sense. These are scientists. Even if you just vaguely Googled them, you'd probably come to the conclusion that this was fine. But this is what makes hallucinations particularly insidious, because they make nearly complete sense. If we're just thinking about language, but on deeper investigation, this shows that this output cannot be relied upon in critical situations. So what does this actually mean? What this means is that really we're here. Right now, generative AI is at the forefront of many conversations. It can do many exciting things that no previous model has been able to do, but it also means the limitations, bearing in mind they're particularly difficult to root out, are poorly understood. Only now are things coming to light that mean that generative AI is not perhaps the be-all and end-all that it may be presented as in some news cycles. So you'll have to forgive me if I use another quote here. What we're seeing here in the marketplace is a significant number of uses for large language models that are perhaps not well thought out. There's been Chevy using it for a chatbot. Somebody has already persuaded that chatbot to offer them a Chevy Tahoe for $1, no takesies backsies. I think we can all appreciate that isn't likely to be legally binding, but it does begin to show how unwarranted trust in large language models can be a risk for organizations. It's only a matter of time before a large language model is used in a place where a company cannot simply say, we didn't mean that. And that's already happening for individuals. So Michael Cohen used AI-generated court citations. He gave these to his own lawyer. They turned out to be fake. They were submitted to the judge without being checked. As you can imagine, judges tend to take a dim view of submitting fabricated evidence. Some organizations use machine learning algorithms to set pricing with very limited controls. So Amazon do this already, for example, and have been for some time. The difference there is that when Amazon's price matching algorithm makes a mistake, they require the manufacturers to repay them for the lost margin they've made by the erroneous matching. In essence, they're socializing losses and centralizing profits. And this works because of the power imbalance in those relationships. But key to note is they haven't actually solved the problem. They've just treated the symptoms. Even in price compliance situations, I have personal experience of these. The European Competition Commission, they will ask you, how was this particular price conceived? And the answer, the neural network said it was a good price, is unlikely to be satisfactory. They want you to lay out the entire calculation logic, and with billions of decision nodes that are inscrutable, that's going to be a challenge. Just to be clear, no wrongdoing was found in that investigation, just a malicious report by a dissatisfied ex-employee. So ignorance more frequently begets confidence, and we're certainly seeing that in large language models right now. Does that mean AI is useless for pricing? So we know now that large language models are inherently black box. All neural networks are when they become sufficiently intelligent. They're impacted by computational irreducibility. A neuron structure is good at language, but bad at mathematics to a given degree. Training of the models is also computationally and therefore financially expensive, as well as taking a long time. So that means changes can be very difficult to make. Faults can also be hidden, and they may only emerge in edge cases. So when they are discovered, removing them can require retraining the entire model. We have a logical input and output situation, but we know that economically businesses and people don't often act rationally. And all of this combined means that the black box model creates not just a financial risk, but also a trust risk in organizations. How many times do you get to explain to the board that the model made a mistake before they restrict the functioning of it to the degree that it isn't adding value anymore? Essentially, this is delegated authority. Would you delegate authority to someone in the workplace that occasionally just made things up? I wouldn't. Now, you can put controls in place. Neural networks are powerful tools. AI is exciting, and it is moving forward at an astonishing pace. there are undoubtedly still going to be some major developments in AI use in business over the coming years, and there is potential for genuine novelty, especially in the use of language. The design and method of tokenization means AI can create things that are genuinely completely new, and this is really exciting. And in some applications like software development or AI image manipulation, huge gains are already on the horizon. To some degree, these are enabled by the function complete element of coding. You have peer review, and in the image piece, you have instant human recognition of positive outcomes. We are seeing large language models trained on specific sources to create knowledge centers language models with specialism in specific subjects. This should make them more trustworthy and more useful. Equally, the understanding of LLMs, large language models, and the importance of non-grammatical parts of language will grow. Things like correctly using names, citations, dates, facts, and figures. This will all further reduce the incidence and risk of hallucinations that matter. There are even already large language models that can be run decentralized. So there's DeciLM 7B, bit of a mouthful, nearly as powerful as ChatGPT 3.5, but will run on your phone with no internet connection. So AI is undoubtedly a space to watch, and it may well be ready for delegated authority in the future, but not yet. So I could talk about this for a lot longer, but I appreciate I have a time limit. So to summarize, 2024 is going to be a year of reduced pricing power, right? We are in economic turmoil. Measuring value and maintaining strength for the pricing organization is in the resilient areas of your business. Avoiding those blanket price changes is going to be key. I would say don't run before you can walk when it comes to AI. You might trip up. AI is exciting. It looks like magic. It isn't. Understand it so you can make logical, sensible arguments about what it is ready to do and what it isn't. And then finally, understandable and manageable systems, right, are key. You need to multiply the power of that stagnating pricing team. There's not going to be a huge growth in the size of pricing teams in 2024. But we have more data, we need to create more value, we need to change price more frequently, and those needs will only grow. So you need to find solutions to those problems that will require creativity, automation, the use of tools and solutions. Essentially, in the end, it's about value delivery. So thank you very much for listening to me talk for the last half an hour or so. I hope it was useful. Any questions?
You bet. Chris, this is Mitch Lee. First, thanks very much for this great walkthrough on what recent history has been, what a quick look forward is, and especially what the forward might do in terms of including AI, things like AI. We have a couple of questions. I have a couple of questions I wanted to ask you as well. I love that your examples where you drew the line at limited memory models in terms of we are here now. And then you expanded on that description of what are we doing and where we are right now, in the sense that limited memory types can't learn. And then you use the sentence limited language models are good at, and the first word it came up with was learning. So I think you touched on this a little bit, but maybe round this out a little bit in terms of as you expose, say in this case, the LLM to more data, isn't that learning, or is that just the limited memory getting bigger and it's still executing the mechanism of finding the most likely next token? Is that, you're saying that's not exactly learning?
It's not learning, no. So, I mean, I think the key point here is the ability for the system to change its method of reaction. So it can react differently to different inputs. So if you change its input model, of course, the output will change. But the way that that input and output are processed at a fundamental level in a limited memory device cannot change. It will be its subset of nodes. Those nodes will have calculations. The calculations within those nodes can change, but the structure of the model itself is fixed. So This is particularly dangerous when you get into those edge cases, because you have all of this data that fits the normal model. As soon as something goes outside of that, you get a reaction that isn't expected, and that's when the system should learn and change, but can't, because it's limited memory.
Right. The function of its behavior doesn't change, and that is, in essence, changing behavior because of different situations is the essence of learning. To do the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. So insanity, hallucinations. Maybe there's a connection here.
There might be something there.
A couple of other related questions to this. People are very, very much interested in the AI aspects of this. There's a question about managing the issue of master data quality, and this person says, in their opinion, that's always the eternal problem. How fundamental is that data quality relative to these limited memory models that we have where we are right now?
This is a fantastic question. This is an example of one of the things that large language models may really be able to help with, because of the concept of tokenization and incomplete data extrapolation. Particularly if you have a large language model trained on a specific data set, using that model to then fill in the blanks, right? Absolutely is something that can be assisted with when it comes to master data. The only, I would say, caveat here is that master data needs to not be imperative to how you're setting value to the product. It could be a small component, because then if a mistake is made, it's not the end of the world. But you certainly don't want it, guessing the engine size of a car, for example, whereas maybe guessing the type of capacitor used on a particular board, that would make sense and is unlikely to hugely impact the value input there. So yes, an LLM definitely could help with master data quality issues if it was trained on a specific data set. Yes, absolutely.
Right, and I think you also touched on this point as well. The more data all the time. The question that we came up just now was data quality, but the black box, unexplainable, fundamentally unexplainable answers that come out of the black box are that is in essence the issue, where you can't interrogate back when something looks strange, or maybe it doesn't look strange, but it's not the right thing in that case. Where you mentioned Kasparov, one of his things was the augmented chess player. So it's a algorithm, limited memory model, Big Blue, but serving up that information, the recommendations, to a chess master who had a different sense, some of the things that weren't exactly in the look in the person's eye, perhaps. Opposed to the entire history of every chess game that ever happened, that says, I'm going to go this way instead of this way. That combination of supervision and, in fact, overruling the capability to reject the recommendation to make a decision that is appropriate based on the situation.
I think the key here, Mitch, I think as pricers, we've all had this experience of when the Excel spreadsheet gets too complicated and the formula references a cell here on another sheet here and then another sheet there, and you have to trace the whole thing back. You go through, stage after stage after stage, and in the end you say, you know what, I'm going to delete this and start again. A neural network is like that on steroids. So you have literally billions of nodes in an LLM. And they're all doing things that they've decided to do as part of the training. No one's ever said this node should do that. So to actually go through and unpick something isn't really, well, it just isn't possible for humans, right? That's where that element of, I guess, when you see a decision being made that doesn't make sense, you have to either discard it or trust it. There's no in between. You can't modify it and say, I'm going to add my potential opinion on top of this, because you don't know how that decision has been come to. And that's where LLMs can be both really helpful, but also actually really hamstring an organization.
Right. in the essence, in the context of what we're talking about with pricing, it's maybe the pricer, we as pricers are in the data enough to feel some level of confidence in the recommendations, but then handing it to the commercial teams for, it's take it or leave it. You have,
How do you explain why
there's
this is the right price? The
exactly,
machine
there's
said
no
so.
context. Yeah, I mean, we got a great model. It's 98% perfect. Well, maybe this time I'm in the 2% that this is going to hurt me as a salesperson, hurt my customer, hurt this relationship that we built with this customer. So the supervision, the overview there, I think is really important. One more question, and then I think we're looking at the end here. Back to the large language models, specifically around plugins. Do you know? Have you seen or compared ChatGPT or Notable work together in anything around pricing? Is there anything like that?
So a lot of the plugins are, I mean, they tend to be as powerful as the original LLM. Sometimes they're constrained a little bit by the environment in which they're being placed. So I haven't used Notable myself. They are a very good way of experimenting with ChatGPT or large language models in a constrained environment. I have seen them deployed externally by organizations, and then I would be very cautious about that. But using them internally as reference points, they seem to be very effective. Yeah. Sure,
like a first draft generation kind of thing, that then an expert comes in with a set of experiences that guide that in the direction that they want.
Absolutely.
All right. I think your points here around what's coming up soon, agility, being able to move quicker. AI is definitely going to be part of that, and the need for pricers to remind the organization of the value that's part of the price, that's inherent in the price being offered, and help the organization retain that value, that profitability, if you will, as opposed to letting the only factor be loading the plants out, consuming the capacity of the organizations to produce goods, and making sure that's running at 100%, and selling based on that basis rather than looking at a profitability basis. That's what I see as what's coming up for the pricing teams. A lot of pricers have been out there and done that before. It's time to dust off all your value-based conversations, because it's not a rising tide of inflation so much that we're seeing anymore. Not anymore. There are going to be areas of every business where there still is value. As pricers, we have to find those, right? And that's going to be key. Value. There's always value. Sometimes it's very small around the edge, but there's always a reason to pick you. Absolutely. Yes, thanks so much. I think that's the end of our questions. Marta, I think you were going to close us out today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris and Mitch, for this excellent presentation and Q&A session. Also, thank you to all participants for joining the webinar with us today. The recording of this session will be ready in a few days, and you can see it on Rewatch the Webinar section on our website. And lastly, I would like to take this chance to announce that our EPP Manufacturing Pricing Forum will be taking place from April 10 to 12 in Barcelona, where Vendavo's team will be joining us. You can visit our website events.pricingplatform.com to find out more about the agenda and the speakers. We hope to see you all there. Thank you again, and have a nice afternoon.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks all.